A very good afternoon to Netherlands and Austria, and a happy evening to India. I hope everyone is safe during this pandemic. Myself, Sumukha S., a final year BCom student of Seshadripuram Union Degree College. Welcome to the 60th international webinar of our Seshadripuram Union Degree College. At the outset, I'm happy to inform you all that our Union Degree College is celebrating its Golden Jubilee year. On behalf of our college, we congratulate all the stakeholders. Today's webinar is fully hosted by the students of Seshadripuram Union Degree College. I request everyone to kindly pardon us in case of any mistakes. Department of English, in association with Utrecht University, Netherlands, and University of Tasmania, Australia, is organizing this international webinar on Digital Humanities Session 18. I now request Nagasudha ma'am, Assistant Professor, Department of Commerce, to play a small video of our college. Over to you, ma'am.
Journey begins with a small step. Proving this statement true, it all began in 1930 when two women educational enthusiasts took up a noble initiative. In the erstwhile posh locality of Seshadripuram, Srimati Anandamma and Srimati Seethamma started a primary school with 20 children. Now, Seshadripuram Educational Trust under its umbrella has 36 institutions. It all began with the educational visionary Sri K.M. Nanjappa, the then President of Seshadripuram Educational Trust, in 1971, which has been a landmark in the history of education for the working students by starting Seshadripuram Evening College.
Our college started with the primary objective of imparting formal education to the quality and needy. The college is affiliated to the Bengaluru Central University. Being in the heart of the city, it has an easy reach and connectivity. Its premises comprise of spacious building with good canteen, computerized library, business lab, browsing center, Wi-Fi facility, sports club, thus well equipped for all academic, sports, co-curricular like NSS, NCC, YRC, etc. and extracurricular activities throughout the year. The college organizes orientation program for freshers and guest lecturers to equip them.
As most of us are working in the morning and studying in an evening degree college, it is very facilitative for us to excel in our jobs. Even though we are studying in an evening degree college, we are being provided many state level and national level opportunities to express our talents. Also, many cultural activities are being conducted.
SEDC is engaged in various cultural activities throughout the year. There are numerous committees in the college that perform variedly on their behalf and have a lasting effect on the college, students, as well as outsiders.
Our evening degree college believes in the vision to ignite the minds of every student to identify and develop their inner strength, with the mission to promote holistic development of students by offering quality education and making them self-reliant and progressive.
Our college NCC cadets will visit every academic year in Officers Training Academy Chennai and INS Kadamba Naval Base at Karwar. It will motivate our college NCC cadets to join Indian Armed Forces.
Thank you, Nagasudha ma'am. I now request Abhishek of third year BCom to welcome and introduce all the dignitaries to this international webinar. Over to you, Abhishek.
A very good afternoon to Netherlands and a happy evening to Australia and India. I take this opportunity to welcome you all for the 60th international webinar of our college. At the outset, I would like to thank all the office bearers of this great institution and welcome all of them. Now I would like to introduce and welcome today's first team speaker, Dr. E.L.S. Stronks, professor at the Utrecht University, Netherlands. Dr. E.L.S. Stronks is professor of Early Modern Literature at the Utrecht University, Netherlands. Her education and research focus on multimedia literature from the Dutch Golden Age, word, image, music, and on digital development in the field of from digital research platforms to educational websites. Her digital research into the authorship of Dutch national anthem served as a case study for her research into digital humanities. Using a combination of new computational analysis and a close reading analysis, a team of Dutch scholars have produced a new and radical different hypothesis for the issue of author attribution of a national anthem that has puzzled scholars for centuries. She is also a very active in using digital technologies to provide new educational platforms for high school students, both in the area of literacy studies, a digital laboratory of literature research, and creativity and professional writing. Ma'am, on behalf of Seshadripuram Educational Trust, wholeheartedly I welcome you for this webinar.
Thank you very much.
Now, I would like to introduce and welcome today's second theme speaker, Dr. Paul Turnbull, a professor of digital humanities and history at the School of Humanities, University of Tasmania, Australia. Dr. Paul Turnbull is a cultural historian with special expertise in the use of computation and information technologies in an historical research and an online publication of its outcomes. His current prime research interest includes the use of digital technologies to research the collecting and scientific uses of the bodily remains of Australia and other indigenous people in the late 18th, 19th, and early 20th centuries. He has international reputation in digital humanities and until his retirement in 2017 held the University of Tasmania first professorship in the emerging and highly experimental field. Sir, on behalf of Seshadripuram Educational Trust, wholeheartedly I welcome you for this webinar.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
It is my proud privilege to introduce and welcome one more distinguished person who is presiding in this webinar, Shri W.D. Ashok Sir, Honorary Trustee, Seshadripuram Educational Trust, Bengaluru, India. Sir holds a master degree in pharmacy specialized in the field of total parenteral nutrition. He served as a famous Al-Adam Hospital, Kuwait for over 13 years. He is an honorary trustee of Seshadripuram Educational Trust. Sir is the backbone for all the events conducted in our Evening Degree College. Sir, on behalf of Seshadripuram Evening Degree College, I welcome and request you to preside over this webinar.
Thank you.
I would also like to welcome our beloved Principal Professor N.S. Satish Sir, who is a man of perfection and a guiding force for having organized 59 international webinars conducted so far. On behalf of our English department, I welcome you, sir. I welcome all the office bearers and trustees of Seshadripuram Educational Trust and all the principals of our sister institutions, other heads of institutions, conveners, volunteers, and all the participants who are registered across the globe. I would also welcome Dhareppa Konnur Sir, Program Coordinator, and Rajat B.S. Sir, IQAC Coordinator. And finally, I welcome our own teaching and administrative staff for this webinar. Thank you. Over to you, Sumuk.
Thank you, Abhishek. May I now request our first theme speaker, Dr. E.L.S. Stronks, professor at the Utrecht University, Netherlands, to enlighten us on the topic Forensic Digital Research into the author of the Dutch National Anthem. For the next 25 to 30 minutes, the floor is yours, ma'am.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for having me. As you heard in the introduction, I'm specialized in the early modern period. And for the Dutch literature, that means anything written between 1500 and 1800. So you could say ancient literature. And yet I'm well involved with digital research, and it has a lot to do with this particular case that I would like to talk about today, the Dutch national anthem. It's the oldest anthem of the world, written around 1560, we assume, we're not quite sure. And one of the biggest riddles around this national anthem is who wrote this. And a real forensic research has been conducted to find out who wrote this anthem. And let me see how I can proceed. The second slide. This is really a matter of authorship attribution. And this field of research is not big because of the Dutch national anthem, but because of two other big issues, you could say. It's on the one hand, it's the real forensic research, FBI related, who wrote what, how can we connect perpetrators to certain deeds, certain crimes. And on the other hand, in literary study, much of authorship attribution has to do with big cases, like who wrote Shakespeare's plays? Was he his own writer, or are there certain style variations visible in his plays that suggest that Shakespeare was perhaps more than one person? Or, well, there has been lots of speculation. And this is why this digital tools available in a field called stylometry, so research into an author's style, has become as big as it is right now. And this is really helpful in solving the case that has traditionally always been solved with close reading, the case about the Dutch anthem. Who wrote this? You can see the first lines here, both in Dutch and in English. I won't go into the text at all, because in fact the text itself and what it means in particular is not all that important. If you look at stylometry, it's more about the style than the content of the text. But I do want to explain a number of things about these texts. It's written for William of Orange, the leader of what was to become the Netherlands. And he was the leader of a revolt that was not yet a revolt. He had the difficult task of becoming a leader of groups of people that were, well, very much divided by religious conflicts. On the one hand, the Catholics, the Protestants, but that you have all kinds of groups in between. And what this song does, the Wilhelmus, it's named after him, William, is that it was able to unite all those people with all those different religious views and to support this revolt. And the revolt was against a Spanish king who was also meant to be, or believed to be, sent by God as a leader. So the revolt in itself was problematic. How could you revolt to a God-sent king? Well, William, or the one guy who wrote this song for him, made this proposition. William is allowed to do this because he is like the biblical Dave, facing also a king doing things that were not good in the eyes of God. And in the same sense, this William, Dave, is allowed to lead this revolt. So what the song does is make a very rhetorical argument that sort of, or that landed in a group of people totally divided, but through this song were able to find common ground, unite itself, start the revolution, and in doing so, founded the Netherlands. It has only been the national Dutch anthem since 1936. So for almost 400 years, nothing much happened with the song, unless, or people sung it and people used it for their group identity, but it didn't have any national status until Second World War II was approaching. And then there was this new need for a national anthem, and this became the Dutch national anthem. The thing with the authorship attribution is that it was published anonymously in 1568, but the first attribution we know of dates from 1602. So around 40 years after it was published, it was said to be written by a poet called Marnix van Sint Aldegonde. And we have numerous sources here. You can find one, a manuscript, where people who were almost contemporary said, well, we now know who this anonymous poet was. It was the excellent Marnix of St. Waldegem. The problem is, Marnix was still alive at that time and didn't for himself claim that he wrote the Wilhelmus, which is pretty weird because he was very much into setting up a reputation for himself as a poet. The Wilhelmus at that time had become a very popular song, and yet Marnix never claimed to have been the author of the song. So in itself, we must not trust this source all that well. What people have done ever since is attribution based on close reading. So they took the text of the Wilhelmus, compared it with as many translations of biblical songs, mainly, that could be compared in their use of word, in their style, in the way they were set up with the Wilhelmus. Almost 25 possible authors were listed. Marnix was very much at the top of the list, but De Haast, Cornet, Writiers, 25 of the almost 60 authors alive and writing at the time have been named as possible authors. In over about 600 publications that were devoted to that issue up till 1993. After that, they started, or they stopped counting, so it's probably a bit more, 60-20 perhaps. Researchers have been trying to find out who wrote the song, who was able to sense this political turn that could be made and use this song and the way it could be distributed to unite the Dutch people. Then when tradition was set beside, the digital turn set in. Around 1990, I would say, the first researcher who worked with a digital approach to Dutch culture, song culture, was Louis Peter Grijp. And he sort of invented a formula, looking at the emphasis placed on specific parts of words in all Dutch songs. He would count them. He would also find a sort of classification for the type of rhyme used. And then he ended up with formulas that sort of typecast every song. And in doing so, he could detect text written on the same melodies. So families of songs that were connected through the use of the same melodies. That in itself has been very helpful in detecting authors, finding out who wrote other anonymous songs, but he wasn't able to solve the Wilhelmus riddle with this approach, because in itself, the rhythm or the formula of the Wilhelmus pattern is very common. So it's not standing out on its own. It's not a very particular formula. Lots of songs have been written on the same melody, the same kind of music. So nothing special there. But in 2060, a new turn in digital methods looked at part of speech rather than emphasis on words. And it approaches the text quite differently. As you can see in the next slide, part of speech means that you're gonna sort of determine the function of certain words in the text. Are they verbs? Are they adverbs? Are they nouns? And all of them get a particular notation. Here, for instance, I've made green marks of all the words that are called function words in this part of teach tagging. And those, if I switch back to the previous slide, you can see are considered to be empty words. Function words are the part of speech that have no meaning: particles, prepositions, conjunction, adverbs. They are most frequently used in everybody's natural speech. Also, you don't pay much attention to them. It's not easy or perhaps even impossible to focus and produce patterns in your function words. Even if you would try, it's very hard to note those empty, content empty words. And statistically, they're interesting because they're so frequently used. So if you mark them in text, you'll end up with certain patterns in text. If you would do the Wilhelmus, all its text like that, you would see almost like a card with specific accent or holes in it. What you do with this kind of analysis in stylometry is that you try to find out through the words that you find in the text to which token and which lemma they belong, because words get, especially in Dutch, they could be in plural or in singular, they could be a neutral or feminine or male of origin. And what you first do is make sure that you detect the sort of global grammatical patterns in it. This is done by machine by now, which means that we have a machine that's able to read 16th century Dutch grammar. Has been years, cost years to build it, and it's not working perfectly yet. So in practice, we did a lot with students who went over text that had been gone through this defining part of speech to find out if it did correct attribution. When we had a full corpus, we then started doing, counting the distribution of words in word classes and ended up with patterns like this. I will explain this in a little bit, but here on the left, you can see a pattern that belongs to a Dutch author called Coornhert. On the right, you can see the pattern that goes with the Dutch author Marnix. And then you can see in the middle in that circle, the Wilhelmus that has a pattern that's very similar in this particular event, at least, to Marnix's patterns of function words. So when we did our first analysis, everything pointed in the direction of the author that was named traditionally. And we were well on our way, we thought, of confirming what had been a riddle thus far. There is a slight but, because this kind of analysis you do by asking the computer or a tool, what is the relative distance between the anonymous text and a possible candidate? This type of method to use authorship attribution is called authorship attribution. There's always going to be an answer, because there's always a relative distance between the anonymous text and the possible candidate. Even if I would submit text to the research corpus, this question could be answered. The relative distance between what I did and what the author of the Wilhelmus did will be, of course, very, there will be a big distance, but there will be a distance. So this is why stylometry came up with a second method of trying to find out, and it's called authorship verification. And this is a much more specific question. Can X be the author of the anonymous text? It's much more like a lineup. Is the real author of the text, the anonymous text, in the lineup that I provide for you? And when we were doing this type of research, our main researcher asked me, I need one guy who is definitely not the author of the Wilhelmus, because I need to have a ground truth. This question, in this particular case, can this one guy be the author of the anonymous text, needs to be answered by no, for us to be sure that the computer is doing its work properly. So you need to give it an imposter to me, somebody that you know cannot be the author. And I said, well, there are 25 out of 60 people living at the time of the Wilhelmus was written. And out of these 60, there's one other guy who wrote numbers or songs very similar to the type of song the Wilhelmus is, but he's never been named as a possible author because he ended up in a big fight with William of Orange, called him an atheist, which was about the worst he could be at the period. So why not take him as our imposter? Because he can never be the guy that wrote the Wilhelmus. So we did the next run of next text and ended up with a corpus where this one guy, and his name is Datain, was indeed part of our corpus too. And here you can see the answer to the question, to which text does the Wilhelmus belong more likely? And to our surprise, when we first did the authorship attribution, Datain's texts were much more related with the Wilhelmus than the guy who has always been on top of everybody's list, Marnix. So here you can see the first method, authorship attribution, performed with Datain and Marnix as the two possible candidates, and Wilhelmus ended up in the field of Datain. So that was our first surprise. And then we did not authorship attribution, but authorship verification. And it became even more obvious. Here, this is hardly visible for you, but we did all kinds of analysis in which we compared parts of speeches, and Datain, which is second to the left, ended up in the authorship verification question as the most likely candidate. Can he be the candidate that wrote the Wilhelmus? Well, the computer said he is the most likely candidate with 89% precision. So that had us work with research that completely set all those 600 prior publications, well, on hold, or perhaps even in another daylight. We then also find out that Datain was present at a fight that was fought in 1567 and in France. And the Wilhelmus is in fact written to the music of a song that was composed during that fight. People had also always wondered, why take a French tune as the base of something that would function as a song for the revolt in the Dutch Republic? And that question now also seemed to be resolved, because Datain was there. He was a preacher working in the army, the Dutch army. So he was at the French location where this particular song was created. So we've sort of felt sure enough to publish our result in a Dutch publication, but also, and I think this is a really interesting aspect of digital research, we invited lots of people to test our results. So use the same research corpus that we composed and do additional tests with different algorithms, different digital tools that work with different digital patterns. Well, the first proof of the pudding was performed by a master student of my own university, who is a Spanish native, so he can't read the Wilhelmus either. He doesn't know what the song says, but he, with his particular software, was able to perform the same kind of test and also confirmed our results. So even also with his algorithms, he found out the same results. We then had a big challenge during the DH290 conference in Utrecht and asked as many people working with stylometry or author contribution if they would do their test with their algorithms and their tools. That was less successful, I have to say. We had two winners who came up with a 93% precision, and both named the same author as the most likely candidate. But this candidate had passed away for about 10 years when the Dutch Wilhelmus was written. So somehow either our research corpus or their tools must have been wrong, because we know that this guy was dead for 10 years. And in the Wilhelmus, there are lots of very recent events that are discussed. So there's no way it could have been written somewhere, placed on a shelf, and then published 10 years later. So how accurate their software was, somehow they must have been critical mistakes, perhaps in the grammatical parser that they used that was not so much attuned to 16th, 17th century Dutch. That's the most likely problem here. I myself, who I'm not a digital expert, so I took a step back and I did some close reading with the guy who had never been in focus, Date, who had translated French psalms, and I looked at, I compared those translations with the kind of David that you see in the Wilhelmus, and I found out that in the Wilhelmus you have a very servant leader, which is the type of leadership that we're now sort of used to, but at the time was very rare. So when William of Orange takes the scene in the Wilhelmus, he says, well, I, Willem of Orange, will protect you, I will serve you, I will look after you, I will do whatever you need, my people. And this is a very specific and sort of untimely kind of describing your own leadership, your future leadership in this case. And I found out that in those psalm versification that they made, you can find the same kind of biblical leadership with Dave in the versification that he made. So there could have been a sort of intellectual link between Date's previous work and the Wilhelmus. Again, could be proof that he is really indeed the author of the Dutch anthem, and which is something else that's also nice with doing digital research, apart from being able to attract lots of people with their own specific expertise. We were able to launch a website for Dutch youth. It's called How to Wilhelmus. And we were able to sort of frame the question of who wrote this song to, is the Wilhelmus a song for you? As you might know, the Netherlands today is a very multicultural country, struggling with multiculturalism in having people find their own tune and place and voice in a society that has so many cultures in it. And this sort of website helps youngsters in finding out what can you find in the Wilhelmus, what can you do with the national anthem to make it your own song. And what's interesting in the case of Date, if we are right, the Wilhelmus was written on a French tune in a German town by somebody who was originally from France. So there's very little what we now call Dutch in the origins of the Dutch national anthem. And this is a kind of nice entrance in the discussion, like when does a national anthem become your own national anthem? How can you make it your own? How can you appropriate it? And you can do this by learning how to Wilhelmus was our claim. Well, this was my contribution of today. I'm really happy to answer questions and find out your response to what I've been talking about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for your insightful team address. I now request our second team speaker, Dr. Paul Turnbull, Emeritus Professor at University of Tasmania, Australia, to enlighten us on the topic, Digital Humanities and Tourism, the Tasmanian Experience. For the next 25 to 30 minutes, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. I will just try to share my screen first, and let's see if I can do this properly this time. Okay, so there we go. Okay, is that, you can see this?
Yes, sir, we can see.
We can see it. Okay, good. So let's start at the very beginning, which is a very good place to start. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm greatly honored to be here, and I certainly would like to say hello to the many students who are working hard, and I see are attending this seminar this evening. It's a difficult time for all of us at the moment, what with COVID-19 and the challenges it's presenting to us, particularly those of us in the educational sphere. But I would hope that one good thing at least comes out of all of the sadness and the difficulties that it has caused, and that is that it kind of brings us a little closer together, and in the reliance that we've had on technologies, video technologies like Zoom over the last, well, nearly a year and a half now, it will allow us to make more use of these technologies and perhaps have conversations which are more international. I think one is always conscious of the degree, particularly being Australian, that we really do need to have conversations with our neighbors and friends in the Asia, South Asia, Southeast Asia regions at the moment. I wondered what I could talk about in the space of 20 minutes after what has been a long and interesting career in what is now today generally described as the interdisciplinary space of digital humanities. I came to digital humanities when it was still very much regarded as the use of computers in humanities settings, before there was a kind of real sense of research interest in digital humanities. And thinking about this, I thought it was probably useful to go back some time before there was digital humanities, in a sense. And it's not that long ago, back to 1999, and to remind myself of an article which was very influential in my thinking at that time and has remained influential ever since. And this is I think a very interesting article which was published by Rob Kling, who was very interested in what he called social informatics. And indeed, within the School of Library and Information Science at Indiana University in the United States, there is now a Rob Kling Center for Social Informatics. Sadly wrong, Rob has passed away. But in this, I think, very important article, he asked the question of, well, what is it that we do with computers, and ideally, what should we do? And his one, I think, very compelling argument was that we have to think about our use of computers in terms of the social uses of information. And when he spoke about social informatics, this is what he meant: the social uses of information, and importantly, in that, the way that computation and information technologies work best when they address human needs and interests. As Rob Kling said himself, what we really need are socially centered, human-centered systems. And I think that's something that's always stayed with me. And when we look at digital humanities today, I would argue that the best work like my colleague Elsa has been talking about, particularly with its educational outreach dimensions, the best work is that which gets us beyond the higher education institutions and into the realm of education generally, into the realm of public enlightenment, doing it what it is that universities should really do. And when we think about digital humanities, I think one of the questions that it's important for us to address is the potential that we have to engage very culturally diverse publics in questions of significance to us about our culture, about our history and how history and our cultural traditions inform who we are and how we look at the world around us today. My work has kind of always been that I've tried to make it very much outwardly focused. One of the first big projects I ever did was with the National Library of Australia, which was centered on the first journal of Captain James Cook. Now, these days in Australian history, James Cook is a very controversial figure. But the important thing is that Cook's journal is one of the most fundamental literary texts for Australians, Indigenous Australians and non-Indigenous Australians today. The original manuscript lies in the National Library of Australia. I was always drawn to look at Cook's writings a bit more closely because of a general interest in early exploration and the relationship between the first Europeans in Australia and its many Indigenous peoples. To my astonishment, what I found was that if I wanted to go and read the journals of Captain James Cook, I could go to the National Library and see quite a nice facsimile copy of the original journal. But if I wanted to read the journals themselves, and they weren't readily available to me in my local library, that it would cost me the sum of something like about 1,700 Australian dollars, which back in the early 1990s was a lot of money. And there are some who would argue it's a lot of money today, even though the value of the Australian dollar has really kind of gone down a little bit over recent years. The important thing, however, was that this was an edition of the journal which the Australian people paid for. What I discovered in my initial research was that these journals were actually commissioned by the Australian government, who paid an extremely large amount of money to a New Zealand historian and a small team of researchers to produce this definitive journal. So we have a document which is very much important, is very important to Australians today. But if we go to your ordinary school library in Australia, will you find it? No, sadly, you won't. Can you buy it? Well, you can now if you are prepared to pay for a reprint edition, which again is not that, is about the same cost as it was in the 1990s. So it's very expensive. So in effect, what it means is Australians, as I discovered, were denied the ability to actually look at one of the most significant documents in early European Australian history. So what I did was to set out to provide a website which would provide the full, a full transcript, a detailed transcript of the Cook's Journal, along with 4 or 5 other very important journals which were written during the course of the voyage. It was then a matter of providing a lot of the things that you would ordinarily provide to people in the way of footnotes, annotations, but we were also able to link the journal to all of the rich collections of imagery which existed, still exist within the National Library of Australia, thus allowing free access to the text of one of our most important historical documents. More recently, a project which I've been involved in, which goes along as we try to get some more funding for it, is an attempt to explore the content of Australian newspapers online. Australia is quite unusual in as much as nearly our entire newspaper record since the early 19th century, something like about 30 million pages of newsprint are now freely available online. And the question that we wanted to explore within this project is whether we could build a service, a web service, which would allow us to understand what people were doing what events were occurring, how they were reported over time. In other words, to try to look at events, things that were occurring on a large scale within Australian society as they developed over time. Now, it proved to be very useful. I think the thing that I learned most about the prototype was the extent to which digital humanities researchers sometimes it's the best thing in the world to be working with people in the field of data science. And I think one of the problems that I see in digital humanities today is a failure in a lot of cases to actually get out there and start those conversations. Since the early 1990s, I found that the best and most rewarding work that has occurred in my own context and in Australian digital humanities more generally has been when we've sat down with information scientists, people who are at the cutting edge of developments in things like high-end data mining, semantic analysis of large amounts of text, so that we can get together and do something which is interesting not only to us, but also socially, broadly, publicly interesting. And in this particular case, because we have a free access to this massive amount of newspaper index, what would happen if we were able to provide a service which would be, in this case, of primary interest to many people within schools and universities, and also the general public, to learn more about the development of things within their society, what people came to talk about over time, what ideas were current at one point in time. Did those ideas become more important? Did people come to talk about new things? In short, is it possible to really look at, go beyond the kind of social history that we have in the past been able to do by looking at things like ordinary numeric records, tax rolls, parish registers, those kind of things, to start looking more at how culture changes over time, how people's perceptions of themselves and their society might change over time. Which brings me to Tasmania. Tasmania, a small island state off the southern coast of Australia. Unfortunately, sometimes it gets missed off the map, as we regrettably find. A lot of people tend to think that it belongs to New Zealand, but no, it doesn't. It's an Australian state. And an Australian state which is interesting because it has a rather unusual history compared to the rest of Australia. I don't really have time to talk about that history in any depth, but I think the important thing is that the work that we have been doing in the sphere of digital humanities at the University of Tasmania has been largely focused on making that history more available to a wider audience. One small thing I could mention in passing is that one of the pieces of work which has been going on, of which I've been involved with a number of colleagues who've really taken the lead on this, is that Tasmania, for its first 50 years, was a penal settlement. It's where convicts from the British Isles, parts of America, and even many parts of India were sentenced to hard labor for periods of 7, 14 years or life. So that by the mid-19th century, much of the population of Tasmania were either convicts or people who'd finished their sentence. And like many penal colonies around the world, good records were kept, very good records. We know an awful lot about these people, so much so that by making these records available, we're able to contribute not only to the history of Tasmania, but also the history of the British Isles and comparatively parts of Europe, because we have very rich data on people's lives. We know all about how long they lived, what diseases they got, what level of education they had, what employment they went to, why they married certain people. In short, what we have is a remarkable picture of European life in the early 19th century sitting at the bottom of the world. And one of our challenges has thus been to make that material far more available to people. But one of the things that has loomed very important to us, how much more time have I got, by the way? Can anyone tell me how much? Have I got 5 minutes?
Ten minutes.
All right. 10 minutes. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. One of the things that is of great interest to us in Tasmania, and I suspect is increasingly becoming something of interest in various parts of India, is the issue of tourism. Tourism has become very important for us in Tasmania. Now, I won't go through all these figures in great detail, but the point is that over 10% of our gross state product, equivalent of our gross national product, is now tourism. It basically contributes $1.44 billion of our gross state product. Indirectly, we can trace something like another 1.58 billion Australian dollars coming into Tasmania. It directly and indirectly supports about 38,000 jobs, or about 16% of the total Tasmanian workforce. Now, this is higher than the Australian national average. And in terms of direct employment in tourism, it's nearly 19,000 jobs, or about 7.9% of our total employment. Now, that's a lot. We find, in fact, that in 2009, before things started to get rather difficult for us all, we had a total of 1.32 million people visiting. We find that they spent, on average, something like about 8 nights. Overall, 10.6 million nights. And what we found is that they spent something like about 2.59 billion on accommodation. Now, I could go on. I'll provide a PDF copy of these notes for you to look at in greater detail. But the point to be made here is that it's very important. And it got us thinking about, well, how is it that we can engage with our tourist visitors? What kinds of things can we do for them? And what we learned from looking at the experience of other countries where tourism is very important. And at the moment, for example, I currently live with my wife here in Austria, where tourism is extremely important to our economy. The question that we put ourselves was, well, you know, what is it that people are interested in? And we found, obviously, that there were two things, one of which was the unique history of Tasmania. The other was its natural environment. And in fact, if the truth be known, at the moment, it's probably its natural environment which is attracting more visitors than it is the history of the island. But nonetheless, the history of the island is very important. So we had various initiatives underway. One that I undertook myself was to take, again, what was a very good book, a very informative, dense book about Tasmanian history, something like about 500 odd pages of scholarship, and turn it into essentially a web resource where we presented the book, but not only the book, we were able to do things like present various maps. So one of the maps that we put together was one which allowed one to explore through time the growth of the city of Hobart, using relatively simple open source Java-based libraries. We were able to get hold of historical maps, layer one on top of the other, and then be able to hyperlink, as it were, to various parts of the companion that we'd written. And the plan eventually one day, hopefully, will be that we extend that out to other tourist resources. So this has been one of our projects which we've done in order to kind of show people just exactly what there is in the Australian, in the Tasmanian context to see. And just in my last few minutes, I'll go back to my keynote if I can find it. Yes. And one of the other important projects we've had, which has been undertaken by researchers who have a greater footprint in tourism than I do, and among them Kansen Oy, who is our new professor of tourism from Malaysia, Anne Hardy, one of our leading researchers in the field of tourism studies. This is focused on whether we can use the new generation of social media to understand more about our visitors and our interactions with them. And the idea, ideally, is to present the kind of information that I've been developing, historical information about Tasmania, along with more detailed information of where people can stay, where they can find something to eat, where there is a national park. In short, where they're able to use an app to find out more about Tasmania as they're traveling in Tasmania. And this project has worked both ways, in as much as it's grown out of also attempts to understand the behavior of our visitors. So in the first stages of the development of this app, one of the things that was important was to give it to people on the understanding that they would provide us, or would rather provide the tourism team, with data about what they did when they were in Tasmania. It could be seen, it could be downloaded, it could be aggregated. So we got a better sense of what it was, where people were going, what times they visited certain places, what places they didn't visit, and probably it would be nice if they did. In short, being able to understand our public in this instance, and then to go away and to think about ways in which we could then come back and engage with them. Now, this has been a relatively short talk where I've talked in very general terms about a number of projects. But I think for those who are starting out in the field of humanities research, I would strongly suggest that one of the things that is perhaps most important is to go back to the work of people like Rob Kling and to think about how it is that we can connect with wider publics, how it is that we can do the things which are probably socially more important than a lot of traditional scholarship has tended to do. It's all very well and good, as I say at the end of the day, talking to a very small audience about some arcane aspect of the humanities. But at the end of the day, I think the really important value is education, is reaching out and basically breaking down the walls which have really encased so many of our universities during the course of the during the course of the last 100 years or so. So I will stop it there, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions. And I'd like to say thank you again for this invitation to give you a short journey through my experience of digital humanities.
Thank you very much, sir, for your insightful team address. Now the floor is open for the interaction. We will take up questions which we have received from the chat box and the registration forms. I request Vinay Sagar sir, Assistant Professor, Department of Commerce, to moderate the interaction session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Sumuk. Very good evening to the dignitaries and the speakers of the evening. My first question is to Dr. Strongs, ma'am. Ma'am, can I go with? Yeah. Ma'am, what kind of digital research platforms do you recommend to undergraduate students?
Yes, that's a very interesting question. I think for just getting a feel of what's possible in the field of digital studies related to text studies or literary studies, it's very good to start with on-the-shelf tools. So tools that are available and have been tested for a number of languages. For instance, a tool like Antkonk, or even a word cloud that allows you to upload your own textual corpora and have them organize these texts in patterns that you don't yourself see with your own eyes. It's a very nice way of testing your ability of finding interesting questions, but also in sort of testing what do I need to do technically to get this working? How would I advance from here? And I admit, I have to say, once you want to advance, you always need information scientists, because on the shelf tools are very neat and work fine, but they're only fine for a number of sort of isolated tasks. If you want to do more sophisticated things, you'll need to find cooperation with people who can adjust the tool or reinvent it and have the tool do more profound and advanced things. But to get started, it's a really good way of getting a feel of the field. And it's in fact a course that we offer to our undergraduate students. And we have them work with tools that allow you, for instance, to chart emotions in text. So how do you find words related or expressing emotions, but also word patterns that allow you to detect how difficult a text is to read for certain audiences. So all of these tools have a various idea of what's interesting in text and what you can find by looking for patterns in text. And it's finding the right tool with the right corpora that's really part of the joy that you can have playing around with digital research.
And ma'am, one more question. Ma'am, how to use digital humanities as an effective tool for teaching?
Well, I've been using digital tools to create shared content. So working together on projects has been accommodated much more using digital tools. But also doing some online testing. For instance, now with the online system that we have, we do make, well, we use Teams, but the idea is the same. You create breakout sessions. You have students work with the exact same corpus, the exact same set of tools. You work in as many groups as you can make, and you have the groups present to each other after for about 20 minutes what they've come up with, so that you're able was I able to come up with sort of sets of corpora that allowed me to ask more specific questions? Was I able to combine certain tools to do more in certain corporas? It's much more like, I would say the word challenge is in place here. It's like in the old days, especially girls, I have to admit, used to embroider big sheets just to show what they could do with embroidering. So they would create this kind of linen with all kinds of different techniques. And this is what we do in teaching a lot also. Just apply the techniques, use the tools, but also think creative with the corpora that you do have. And most often historical corpora are perfect to work with because they're available online, for instance, through Google or the Internet archives. And it's sort of finding a way of posing the question in such a way that you do get results. And we actually had a lot of fun comparing the results after 20 minutes to see what were people able to do, how were they able to combine techniques and parts of techniques that they've been used before. So that would be a good way to sort of implement it in teaching as well.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for answering our questions. Yes. My next question is to Dr. Paul Turnbull. Sir, can I go with?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sir, how effectively we can use digital humanities to promote tourism?
That's a good question. I think the first thing to do is to go back to the old point that was made many years ago, again by Rob Kling and others, that content is very important, and that the more one can draw upon making what is significant outcomes of historical research, things of cultural significance, and I would also extend that to information about the natural environment, readily available in an engaging form, ideally interactive as much as possible, then one starts to build up, I think, people's engagement, their interest in a particular place. So I think it's really a matter of asking the question, well, what is it that people may well be interested in? And then starting to think about the resources that are to hand that one can then present to people in ways which are engaging and, of course, educational. One only has to go back to the 19th century where, for example, anyone who was traveling in virtually any part of the world went and bought what was known as one of the Baedeker Red Guides, which provided very detailed information, so much so that I have one here for Vienna, which was published in the 1890s, which is far more interesting and engaging than some of the more recent Lonely Planet books, which are about an area. I think one can never underestimate the degree to which people are curious about the history and the culture of somewhere where they might like to go. So I think that's the first thing. And then after that, obviously, it's a way of thinking about how it is that one can build resources which are going to be sustainable over time. And this is where, in a lot of cases, thinking very long and hard in collaboration with colleagues in various areas of information and computational sciences can be very useful by looking at how it is that it may be, ideally, that open source software and code may well be the best way to go. And in my experience, it's been the case that too often people have gone for an off-the-shelf solution and then suddenly find that they're not able to continue to build upon the intellectual or the cultural investment or the scientific investment that they've made in the resource that they're building. So it really starts with what in the software industry they refer to, I think, as rapid application development. You ask questions. Well, what is it that we're trying to do? And to be quite flexible and to talk to people, ideally to know more about your audience and ask them, as happened in the Tasmanian case, about what it is that really is of interest to them, and then start to try to work out how digital humanities can engage that interest.
Sir, one more question. Sir, what are the future opportunities to promote Tasmanian universities tourism, sir?
What are the opportunities?
Yes, sir.
Well, the opportunities, I think one of the big challenges for us is actually managing tourism. I mean, in some ways, Tasmania has been extremely successful. We have a remarkable number of tourists coming from parts of China. We have an increasing number of people coming from India up until recent shutdowns. One of our biggest markets these days, or one of our largest groups of visitors, is actually from places like Singapore. And I think the question then is to really think about how it is that we can engage with those audiences whose expectations about Tasmania may well be somewhat different from what they actually find. And I think this is one of the interesting things about trying to present oneself and one's culture and one's history. It's best done in some ways by, really trying as much as possible to present the complexity of it, rather than a kind of fairly straightforward, traditional kind of tourist view of idealism, ideal views of what a society is. I just don't think that that is really where we should be going. I would also say too that one of the biggest problems that is developing in Tasmania is we have too many tourists. And one of the big challenges will be, I think, trying to educate people as to the fragility of the Tasmanian environment, and really trying to do that in a way in which we try to deal as sensitively as we can with the fact that we may have to just drop the number of tourists who are coming. Because our environment is just so sensitive in some areas that we're becoming extremely worried that it may well be that some areas there are just too many people visiting, and we may have to somehow deal with that. So I think in some ways it's less opportunities for us than actually dealing with the challenges. And I think if one was thinking about, the district around Bengaluru, for example, which does have natural reserves, that there is an interesting history within the region. There's also an interesting cultures that are there. How does one really present those in a way which is kind of realistic? It's a good question. It's a very difficult question, that one.
Thank you so much, sir, for answering our questions. This is all from the Q&A session. Over to you, Samak.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, respected speakers, for answering the questions of the participants. A small announcement before the presidential remarks. We will now send the feedback form link in the chat box as well as to your registered email address, which will be active for the next 48 hours. Kindly fill the same and send back for e-certificates. The e-certificates will reach you within 7 to 10 days. Very shortly, we will meet in the 61st International Webinar of our evening college, that is on the 24th of this month. On Digital Humanities Session 19, in association with the University of Manchester, UK, University of Vienna, Austria, and King's College, London, UK. Now I request Sri W.D. Ashok sir, Honorary Trustee of Seshadripuram Educational Trust, to render the presidential remarks. Over to you, sir.
A very good evening and good afternoon to the Australian speakers. From Seshadripuram Evening Degree College, in association with the Department of English and the University of Netherlands and University of Tasmania, Australia, organizing this international webinar on digital humanities, session 18, which has gone up wonderfully with the theme speakers, Ellen Stronks and Dr. Paul Turnbull, has given a wonderful talk on their respective theme subjects. One of them has given on the forensics digital research, and Dr. Paul has given about the digital humanities and tourism in the Tasmanian area. I would like to just emphasize on the Indian text, that is, as the annual tourism was increasing in the world, due to the pandemic, it has all ended in a zero position. Now tourism starts with the internet. Why? Because we search for hotels, travel tickets online. So whatever the tourism starts, now it has become an internet option in the first place itself, not like earlier. And the GDP of the country also starts acquiring a portion from the tourism itself. Up to 7 to 10% of the GDP comes from tourism to India until earlier to this pandemic. And it has provided around 42 million jobs in the tourism industry all throughout India.
Wow.
8.1% of its total employment was also coming. The sector is predicted to grow at an annual rate of 6.9% as predicted in the next coming years. In our government's position, the things which have been taken up from the earlier positions, in the platform of Incredible India, the government with the statement of Incredible India has pushed the tourism into a forefront. The implementation of Incredible India is going digital implementation of smart tourism in digital India. The digitalization utilizes the digital database and the digital mapping, which will depend on technology components. With GPS, that is the global position system, also in place with the Google and other platforms, the tourism is gaining more effect with these options also in India. To determine the flow current of tourism, the GPS is also being utilized. How many tourists came from which place and how many tourists are moving out from that place to the next tourist spot. All this is being tracked from the GPS also at the same time. And also it is an understanding of the history of the tourism pattern, which is also being developed from the digital platforms. Dr. Paul has also given a much more understanding of the area of concern, and also he has stated about the library and their national libraries being utilized for their old texts regarding James Cook, and also in the people, indigenous people and the earlier Europeans who have come and taken up their positions in the earlier days. He has also talked about the Tasmanian records, how it has been preserved and how importance it has been given. So similarly, I would like to just quote some from the Indian text point of view, that the project Madurai is a place in Tamil Nadu, and it is a Tamil place. So government has also taken up the project Madurai. Is a open and voluntary initiative to collect and publish free electronic editions of ancient Tamil literacy classics. This means either typing or scanning old books and archiving the text in one of the most readily accessible formats, that is e-text. That is the format which has been, the government has taken up, or the volunteers who have put. E-text is the one platform which has been used for use on all popular computer platforms. All e-texts will be distributed in both web and HTML formats and PDF formats, distributed through the World Wide Web servers. Anyone can be utilizing this or may download it, and it is free of charge. So just bringing to the notice of people who are interested in the Tamil literacies or Tamil text, they can go to this project Madurai to just have a look at it, where the government or the volunteers have taken up the works. I would like to thank Dr. Paul and Dr. Els. Dr. Els has given the forensics of the Dutch national anthem, the past and the present, how it has been forwarded, and who all were involved in their text. So thanks to both the speakers. Just a small thing for Dr. Paul, when going through the research of old texts, for example, if you are going to do a research, is it research or is it spying? I just want, for example, if you are the local person, it will be a research. If you are out of the country, the person, it will be spying. So I just want to make just a joke from the joke point of view. Just thank you very much, sir, for being part of this Seshadripuram Evening Degree College webinar. And thanks to madam also for participating in this wonderful day program. Thanks to all the coordinators who have brought about this wonderful platform. Thanks to the students, Samuk, Abhishek, to start out the program. Thanks to Nagasudha madam, Vinay Sagar, and Principal N.S. Satish, who has coordinated it wonderfully. Thank you one and all to participate in this program. Thanks once again.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for rendering the presidential remarks. I now request Sriranjini of third year BCom to propose the vote of thanks. Over to you, Sriranjini.
A very good afternoon to Netherlands and Australia and a happy evening to India. It is my proud privilege to propose vote of thanks in behalf of Seshadripuram Evening Degree College on this occasion. At the outset, I thank Utrecht University, Netherlands and University of Tasmania, Australia for associating with us to conduct this international webinar. I would like to express our sincere gratitude to Dr. E.L.S. Stronks, Professor, Utrecht University, Netherlands. I'm humbled and grateful to you, ma'am. I would like to express our sincere thanks to Dr. Paul Turnbull, Emeritus Professor, Digital Humanities and History of School of Humanities, University of Tasmania, Australia. Thank you, sir, for your valuable words. I express our sincere thanks to Shri W.D. Ashok, sir, Honorary Trustee, Seshadripuram Educational Trust, for rendering the presidential remarks. Thank you, sir. I express our sincere thanks to our beloved, young and energetic Professor N.S. Satish, sir, Principal, who was the robust of our Seshadripuram Evening Degree College. Thank you, sir. I would like to thank Dhareppa Konnur, sir, Program Coordinator, Rajat P.S., sir, Coordinator at QSC, who have helped us to materialize this webinar. I express our gratitude to all the principals, conveners, and members of our sister institutions in other colleges, academicians, research scholars, students, and delegates across the globe for participating in this webinar. I would like to convey our heartfelt gratitude to Seshadripuram Evening Degree College for giving us, the students, this special opportunity to host this international webinar. We will ever remain grateful to our teaching and administrative staff for their support. Thank you, one and all. Over to you, Samukh.
Thank you, Sriranjini. Once again, thank you, one and all. Principal, sir, can we conclude the webinar?
Yeah. Thank you, Stronks, ma'am. Thank you for joining with us. Thank you, Paul, sir. Thank you very much for joining with us, sir. Thank you, Ashok, sir.
Thank you.